So I'd like to spend some time talking to you today about a topic that I feel is very important within the Buddhist practice. It's called Buddhist morality. This is one of the topics that I feel is very much overlooked within the Buddhist practice. Normally, when someone wants to get into Buddhism, they jump straight away into meditation, philosophy and wisdom of the Buddha. But they fail to neglect that Buddhist morality is actually the basis for which the Buddhist practice is built. For us monks, I've only been ordained for about a year and a half, but the Buddha stipulated that for all new monks, they must spend the first 5 years after their ordination devoting their time towards a study of Buddhist morality or moral discipline. So before we get into meditation or into the profound concepts of prajna paramita, we have to spend the first 5 years working on developing our moral discipline. So as we can see, the Buddha emphasized the importance of practicing moral discipline in the monastic life. But apart from the monastic life, what about for regular lay people who aren't ordained? The Buddha mentioned that regardless of whether you are a monastic or a lay person, the practice of moral discipline is indispensable to the practice of Buddhism. We tend to only like to do things that reaffirm that what we're doing is right. That's one of the reasons why Buddhist morality is so difficult to practice, because practicing moral discipline according to the Buddha's precepts tends to run against our deep-seated habits and tendencies. The habits that we've been building up since time immemorial, all the conditioning that we've been subjected to through our upbringing, through our environment, through the people we associate with. And a lot of what we get exposed to on a daily basis actually leads to a lot of toxic emotions within our body and within our mind. And practicing the precepts is a way to take care of those toxic emotions. We take care of them by abstaining from doing the things that lead to our suffering. What I'll be covering over the course of the next few weeks, I'd like to spend some time going into detail about what Buddhist morality is and take a detailed look at the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts are the precepts that are practiced by lay people. And I see that a number of you here today have your brown sashes, which means that you've taken the precepts. But for those who haven't taken the precepts, hopefully after this series of lectures, it will help you dispel some of your doubts and fears about taking the precepts. And for those who have already taken the precepts, perhaps you can treat this as an opportunity to learn more about each precept within the moral code. What I'll be going over is, what is the role of moral discipline within the Buddhist practice? What is morality? And how does Buddhist morality differ from the conventional notions of morality? Then I'll talk about how do we go about cultivating moral discipline as a Buddhist practitioner. What are the benefits of observing moral discipline in our practice? Then I'll be going into a detailed discussion of each of the 5 precepts. So what are the factors that must be present to constitute a violation of each precept? So we'll learn that in order to be deemed as an offense, certain factors have to be present, like the object, the intention, the perception, the effort, and the result. And the number of these factors that are present determines the severity of the offense. So when all the factors are present, then that constitutes a full violation of the precept. So we'll also look at some of the scenarios where a precept would not be violated and qualify as an exception to the rule. Then I'll be going into the benefits of upholding each precept. As we'll see, morality is rooted in the universal law of causality, or cause and effect. Now, every action we perform has a corresponding effect to it. Just like you plant a seed in the ground, you give it nutrients like sunlight, water, and fertilizer, and the cause will naturally give rise to the effect. You eventually will reap the fruits when it has matured. Well, moral discipline can be seen in a very similar light. If you water the seeds of virtue and goodness within you, then the corresponding effect is the manifestation of wholesome benefits that contribute to your own well-being. So we'll look at some of the benefits of upholding each precept, as well as some of the consequences for failing to observe these precepts. The foundation for the Buddhist practice or what are known as the three most important pillars for Buddhist cultivation is what we call the Threefold Training. So it consists of three factors: Sila, which means morality; Samadhi, which is concentration or stillness of mind; and Prajna, which means wisdom. So just like any monument or building that relies on its main pillars for support, the Buddhist practice cannot take hold without the presence of all three of these factors. The lack of any one of these three factors is not sufficient to lead you to be successful in your practice. So all three have to be present in order for us to achieve liberation from our sufferings and to achieve a spiritual awakening. As you can see here, I put it in the shape of a triangle with double-pointed arrows, indicating that each factor is necessary for the other to develop. One factor cannot exist without the other. Sila and Samadhi and Prajna, they all go hand in hand. In truth, at the ultimate level, they are one and of the same. The perfection of wisdom is expressed through the perfection of moral conduct. And the perfection of moral conduct is a reflection of the perfection of the stillness of mind and equanimity of mind that you develop by developing your samadhi. So really, there is no difference at the ultimate level when you have achieved enlightenment. But within the relative truth, within that domain in which our minds function, we still have to differentiate, and we still have to conceptualize. We start off the process by first developing our moral discipline. And why is it that we have to first start by developing our moral discipline? Well, we know that karma is created by our body, speech, and mind. Now, body and speech are simply the outward expression of what goes on in the mind. So the thoughts that you think leads to the speech and the actions that you perform. Now, some of the thoughts that you think don't necessarily manifest themselves in the form of outward behavior, but they are latent seeds in your consciousness that remain dormant until the right conditions are there to make them manifest. But what does manifest itself in the form of outward behavior are the crude and the habitual thoughts that you constantly give rise to. So if you consistently harbor thoughts of hatred and ill will towards someone, then eventually it's just a matter of time before your thoughts of ill will lead to some sort of speech or action that harms the other person. The same is true if you obsessively crave for something that you desire. Giving rise to those thoughts of desire will eventually lead you to culminate in an action to try to satisfy that craving. So the point of first practicing moral discipline is to address and to eliminate the crudest defilements of the mind that are expressed in the form of speech and action, those concerned with killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, harmful speech, and taking intoxicants. When your moral conduct is pure, then that is when you will have already eliminated most of the harmful defilements that lead to your unhappiness. And when your mind has been purified of these gross defilements, and you're living without any guilt or remorse from the actions that you've committed, then your mind will naturally live in a state of stillness, which leads to the development of samadhi, which is stillness of mind, and to the final development of wisdom. So that's the reason why the Buddha stressed the importance of observing sila in our practice. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, Huayan Jing, the Buddha said, 戒为无上菩提本，应当一心持境界, which translates as sila is the foundation for achieving the unsurpassed Bodhi. Therefore, one must wholeheartedly uphold the precepts. So we can see that moral discipline holds a very important place within the Buddhist practice. And as beginners to the practice especially, this is an area that we should focus on before we delve into our meditation and the more profound aspects of the philosophy. So now that we've talked about what the Threefold Training is and the importance of first developing our moral discipline, let's look at what morality is. So the subject of morality and ethics is one that is often prone to debate and differences of opinion, especially when it comes to topics like abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, same-sex marriage. You'll find that in every major election, these topics are at the forefront of discussion, behind topics like healthcare and the economy. And you'll find that this is one of the most contentious topics that they bring up in their discussions. So why is that the case? Well, one of the major reasons why is because most people's definition of what is moral and what is not is conditional upon the culture and society that they belong to and the environment that they've been raised up in. So different cultures reflect different values and belief systems. And our idea of what is right and wrong is often constructed based on those values and beliefs. So for example, we know that foot binding in China, which began in the Song dynasty around the 10th century and lasted up until the early 20th century, was not only an acceptable custom in China, but it was regarded as a symbol of status and beauty, especially among the people in the aristocratic society. They saw women who had their feet bound as being more graceful, refined and beautiful than ones who didn't. In many parts of the world, like Europe, India, Africa, and China, and even in the United States, up until not long ago, slavery was accepted as legal and moral. And having many slaves at your disposal was seen as a symbol of power and status. During the French Revolution, public execution by the guillotine was a common practice, used to discourage people from revolting and inciting uprisings. And this practice was deemed to be morally responsible at the time. Polygamy, having multiple wives or multiple husbands, and child marriages, which was especially prevalent in India for centuries and still continues to this day, are seen as morally responsible behavior. So with all the different cultures that exist, we should ask ourselves, is morality just a relative concept that depends on factors of time, place, and cultural influences? Or is there a universal principle that should guide our understanding of what morality is? So in order to answer this question, we need to first arrive at a satisfactory definition of morality. Morality should be what allows us to be in harmony with ourselves, with our society, and with the true nature of reality. If we can all agree that this is an appropriate definition to work with, then we can see that while conforming to different cultural values and norms may be seen as being in harmony with our society. We also have to consider the harmony that exists within ourselves and with reality. So conforming to social conventions and norms may not necessarily lead us to be in harmony with ourselves and with reality. In fact, a lot of the things that are socially acceptable lead to a lot of disharmony within ourselves and run counter to the nature of reality. Example being arranged marriages, slavery, the ruthless killing of animals for food. So this is where the Buddhist concept of morality comes in. The Buddhist concept of morality is devoted entirely to living a way of life that allows us to be in harmony with ourselves, our society, and with reality. So if our definition of morality is one that leads us to be in harmony with these three things, then we also have to understand that this definition is rooted in our basic desire to be happy and to be free from suffering. This desire to be happy and to be free from suffering is common to all beings. And if we are to live a moral life in harmony not only with ourselves but with the rest of society, then this pursuit of happiness should not come at the expense of the happiness of others. So it has to be selfless in nature. And if that's the case, then it has to be a universal goal that we work towards. Now, as such, morality then simply can't be a relative concept that depends on localized cultural factors. It has to be guided by some unchanging or universal truth. Now, Buddhist morality recognizes this truth as the law of cause and effect, or causality. Causality tells us that the practice of goodness leads to happiness, and the practice of evil leads to suffering. And this natural law can be validated by personal experience. If you express kindness to someone, barring from any other karmic interferences, you will be reciprocated by that kindness. If you constantly lie and cheat, then not only will you be unwelcome by other people and lack other people's trust, but you also face consequences with the law. Now, this might seem obvious to all of you, but as the Chinese saying goes, while a 3-year-old may know this, even an 80-year-old veteran may not be able to put it into practice. So from the Buddhist point of view, morality is the basis for following the path towards liberation from our sufferings and to achievement of the ultimate bliss and happiness found in nirvana. And by practicing pure moral conduct according to the Buddhist teachings, we can learn to be in harmony with ourselves, our society, and with reality. So now that we have a basic understanding of what Buddhist morality is, the next question we should ask is, how do we go about practicing moral discipline? Well, the Buddha was not just an armchair philosopher theorizing about morality or the path to enlightenment, but he actually formulated, based on his own personal experience and insightful wisdom, a set of moral principles to help us in our practice of moral discipline. And the moral principles are rooted in the 5 major precepts. So the first precept is refraining from taking the life of any sentient being. So that includes not only humans, but sentient beings from the other realms of existence. So the one particular realm of existence that we have a difficult time dealing with are the animals in the animal realm, because these sentient beings are ones that we have to coexist with, and sometimes they can be a nuisance, and we have to find a way to deal with the problems associated with taking their lives, either for food or for protection. The second moral principle is refraining from taking what is not given. So that means no stealing, taking things that don't belong to you. And this is one of the most complex and difficult precepts to follow. And you'll find that in the Buddhist commentary, this precept contains a very lengthy discussion of what constitutes a violation and the exceptions involved. Because within this precept of stealing, there are a number of subtleties that can be easily overlooked that would constitute a violation. So over the course of the next few weeks, when we get into a detailed discussion on this precept, we'll talk about each of the different scenarios that might constitute a violation, as well as the exceptions. Refraining from sexual misconduct, that's the third one. So no adultery, not having a relationship with anyone other than the person you're committed to. The fourth is refraining from false speech or harmful speech. And this not only includes lying, but also includes cursing, double-tongued speech, gossiping, insincere flattery, exaggeration. And we'll talk in detail about what are some of the factors involved in this precept and how to refrain from violating whenever possible. Now, the fifth one is refraining from taking any intoxicants or drugs. And this includes alcohol or narcotics, other substances that confuses the mind and clouds our judgment. As you just saw in the previous slide, the 5 precepts were shown in a negative perspective, from the perspective of abstaining from doing something. Now, when the Buddha formulated the precepts, he not only had the intention of just telling people to abstain from committing these actions, but with every precept that he formulated, there was also a positive aspect to it. In Pali, the avoidance or abstaining part is what we call the vritta, and the positive performance is the charita. So whenever we take the precepts, we have to take a vow. And that vow is not only to end all evil, but we must practice all goodness. So that is why when you uphold these precepts, it's not simply enough to abstain from doing the things that would be deemed as a violation, but to actively pursue acts of goodness through the practice of these 5 things. So the first is protecting the lives of all sentient beings. That's the counterpart to not taking the life of any sentient being. Practicing generosity towards all sentient beings. Cultivating sexual responsibility and protecting the safety and integrity of all beings. Practicing kind and loving speech. And consuming only items that lead to physical and mental well-being. So when we say consuming only items that lead to our well-being, obviously we're not talking about alcohol and substances that clouds our judgment, but this not only includes the type of food that we eat, but it also includes the type of sense objects we expose ourselves to on a daily basis, because we also consume those. It is the mind that consumes those things. So that also needs to be taken into account when we practice upholding this precept. We should know that the 5 major precepts are what form the foundation of the Buddhist practice on morality. And while the 5 precepts are meant only for lay people, we should know that the monks and nuns, which follow many more precepts, so 10 precepts for novice monks or nuns, 250 for monks, 348 for nuns, and all the Bodhisattva precepts, they are all derived from these 5 basic precepts. So even the 250 and 348 precepts for monks and nuns, all they are further extensions of what these 5 precepts are. All those precepts, including all the minor ones, were formulated by the Buddha to protect us from violating any one of the 5 major precepts. So we can see that the 5 precepts hold a very important place within the whole framework of Buddhist moral discipline. Now that we know what the 5 precepts are, we should then ask ourselves, how do we take them and start observing the precepts? Now, in order to take the precepts, you have to go through a formal process of initiation by a teacher in the Buddhist monastic order who has achieved moral purity and is well versed in the Vinaya. Now, the Vinaya is a Sanskrit term that refers to the specific moral code that Buddhist practitioners have to follow. And this differs from Sila, which refers to the moral discipline or conduct that leads to the liberation of suffering. While the Vinaya refers to the specific moral code in the Buddhist scriptures. Now, we may ask, why do we have to go through a formal ceremony in order to receive the precepts? If I want to follow the Buddhist path, can I just make a personal vow to uphold the precepts? Why do I need to go through all the formalities? If I'm serious enough about practicing these precepts, why do I still need to go through a formal process? If I have the sincerity, can I just practice it without any formal acknowledgement? We should understand that the formal process belongs to what we call a phenomenon or a relative truth. And relative truth and absolute truth go hand in hand. The existence of one requires the existence of the other. Just like you can't separate birth and death, left and right, up or down, they're 2 sides of the same coin. And by phenomena, other than the formal process, what do I mean? Well, by phenomena, I mean all the objects, all the physical, all the physiological, all the psychological objects that can be perceived by your 6 senses. So your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your body, and your mind. All the things that exist as a product of your process of perception and conception. And what is the absolute truth? Absolute truth is the true nature of reality, a non-dualistic understanding of things as they truly are. Now, as the Venerable went into detail over the last year in the Heart Sutra, it says that form is no different than emptiness. Emptiness is no different than form. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Now, in form, we can see the impermanence and the constantly changing nature of all things. And in form, we can see that all things appear when the causes and conditions for its manifestation are present, and that there's no real solid existence with form. And it is in that understanding that the truth of emptiness reveals itself. Now, at the same time, it is in the truth of emptiness that makes possible the appearance of all form. Just like it is the expanse of space that allows the universe to unfold, or the open sky that allows for the formation of the clouds. The truth is revealed in the phenomena, and the phenomena is manifested by the truth. So the relative truth and the absolute truth are really one and the same. Now, the formal ceremony is really no different from this. The formal ceremony is the relative, or what we call the conventional means, that we use to bring out our true understanding of the absolute truth. Without the relative, we have no means of getting to the absolute. We use our 6 senses to interact and understand the world. So we have to also use our 6 senses to get to the truth. Now, this still begs the question, if I'm sincere enough, why can't I just make a personal vow without going through all the formalities? Isn't a personal vow also a type of phenomenon that I can use to arrive at the absolute truth? Well, when we want to show our appreciation and gratefulness to someone who has helped us, what do? Do we simply acknowledge to ourselves that that person has offered help to us and we're very appreciative and grateful for it? Or do we do something more? And the answer is, when someone has helped us, what we do is we express our appreciation and thanks through a formal process of thanking the other person in person, or offering gifts and presents to that person as a token of our appreciation and thanks. We do it through a formal process. The same is when we want to recognize our important achievements, like graduating from high school or university. How do we express it? We express it through a formal graduation ceremony. How do the people of a country come together to show their patriotism? They go through a formal process of singing the national anthem together. Now, it's in that process that brings out their feelings of patriotism towards the country. Patriotism, you can say, is the ideal or the truth, and the singing of the national anthem is the conventional means that they use to bring out that ideal. So that's why we have to go through a formal ceremony to take the precepts. It's the process that allows us to bring out an understanding of the absolute truth and to develop the virtuous qualities that are inherent in properly upholding the precepts. So now that we have a basic understanding of how to take the precepts, we should then ask ourselves why we have to take them. Now, many people will think that knowing that I must be good and that I must practice morality is good enough. Why do I still need to take precepts to affirm what I already know? Now, to answer this question, we first have to know the difference between one who practices goodness and one who has taken the Buddhist precepts. Now, the biggest difference is that one who does charity without taking the precepts is practicing goodness dependent upon conditions and circumstances. That person's willingness to do good is only determined by the presence of the right conditions to perform certain acts of kindness. So, for example, when they see an amputee begging for money on the street, they will give rise to certain feelings of sympathy and pity for that person. And out of that emotion, they will give rise to a feeling of kindness towards that person, and that will result in him probably giving him some money. Now, instead of an amputee, it was that person's enemy that was begging for money on the street. Then we can't really say whether or not that person would offer money to him. Unless he was able to let go of his grudge against that person, then it would be probably quite unlikely. But on the other hand, someone who has taken the precepts has committed themselves to the vow of upholding the precepts and of practicing goodness, regardless of what the circumstances and conditions are. So the difference is that person is being led by his vow rather than by emotion. He is motivated by his aspiration to practice goodness unconditionally, to end all evil and to help all sentient beings, as opposed to the person who practices kindness periodically, depending on his own mood or on other circumstances that are outside of his control. So we can see that there's a big difference between the two. We have to know that it's not good enough just to know what is good and what is bad, but we have to aspire to be good and not to be bad. So if we want to find happiness in our life, we need to make being good our goal. We have to orient ourselves and our lives toward this goal. Now, while we're on the topic of taking vows and setting goals, there was a psychotherapist back in the early 20th century. He was also a cosmetic surgeon, and his name was Alfred Adler. Now, Alfred Adler, he stressed the importance of goal orientation. He said that the goal that we set for ourselves is really an image that we have in the mind of what we want to be. So everyone has a self-image of what they are. And Alfred Adler, he found that our actions and our personality are based on this self-image of who we see ourselves to be. So if we want to change our behavior or our personality, then we have to first start with changing our self-image. Now, Adler found that when he operated on women to improve the look of their faces, when their faces changed, their personalities also changed as well. Now, he looked into this phenomenon further and began to experiment in different ways. He discovered that some women, even after surgery, did not experience a change in personality. And the reason was because they didn't believe that the operation had improved their look. So he decided to convince these women that they were good looking. And once he was able to do so, he noticed that their personalities also began to change. So he took this experiment another step further, and when women started coming to him for surgery, he convinced them that they were already very beautiful and that they didn't need to have an operation done. And when these women were convinced, their personalities and behavior also changed. So we can see that the self-image that we have of ourselves is very important. And if we want to make a positive transformation in our life, then it starts with first orienting ourselves toward a goal. That goal then becomes the self-image that we strive towards. Now, in the same way, if we can orient our goal towards the perfection of our moral conduct and to become virtuous, like the Buddha, then that becomes our self-image. And slowly our behavior and personality will change in ways to reflect that self-image that we have of ourselves. So we can see the importance of taking vows, of upholding the precepts. It's very important that we set that goal for ourselves of achieving that highest ideal of virtue and goodness. Now, before we head off for lunch, I'd just like to cover my last point, which is the other major difference between one who practices goodness and one who has taken the precepts is that those who perform goodness without the aspiration are working only within a very narrow scope. They only perform acts of kindness selectively to those around them or when it's convenient for them to do so. But someone who has taken the precepts, their vow applies not only to the people around them, but it extends to all sentient beings, including those in the animal realm and all the other realms of existence. Their object of attention has been broadened to include all sentient beings. And that includes even their enemies or people they don't get along with. And this is really the heart of the practice of walking down the path of a Bodhisattva, because a Bodhisattva exudes boundless compassion to all beings, regardless of their background, regardless of their gender, their race, their ethnicity. And this is the goal that we set for ourselves when we take those precepts.